everyone, and welcome to Life Mastery TV, your source for inspiration, empowerment, and fulfillment. My name is David McLeod. I am your Life Mastery coach, author of the book, A Life to Die For. And today I'm embarking on episode number 164 called Doorway to God. If that sounds a little bit strange, like a strange title, maybe it is a little bit for some of us, but we're going to have some fun with this. So for those of you who are here on the live presentation, I just want to remind you that we are indeed live. So I'd like to encourage you to please feel free to participate by posting your questions and comments in the chat area. And we will answer those and respond to them as they come up in a timely manner. So let's get right to it. Death is something that stirs fear in the hearts of and minds of a lot of people everywhere. Many people imagine that at the end of their physical existence, life simply comes to an end. And the idea that they may cease to exist is one of the most frightening thoughts that comes to mind. Many people, however, also wonder about what might happen after they cross the boundary between life and death. Is there a heaven that they can go to? Is there life after death? Well, interestingly, most people who have done personal growth work and who have deepened the connection to their spiritual essence seem to be much less fearful of death than most other folks. And they seem less likely to cling to ideas of rationality, logic, science, and linear thinking, and spend more time focused on heart and soul and spiritual stuff. So this is a transitional phase that some people go through, but not everyone. Now, my guest today is one of those rare individuals who has come face to face with death and awoken to a whole new appreciation for life and all that it offers. As a world-renowned author, speaker, and coach, he underwent a near-death experience in 2018 and emerged with some amazing wisdom and truth that he will share with us during today's conversation. So please join me in welcoming the amazing Kellan Fluckiger to our show today. Welcome, Kellan. It's so great to see you again. I'm glad you're here.
Well, David, despite our little difficulties getting started a little late, none of that fusses me too much. I'm grateful to be here and to be part of your show, be part of your tribe, and to lend whatever service and blessing I can to you and to those that might watch this episode.
Right. Well, again, I'm just so thankful, and I hope I didn't mispronounce your last name. Can you just say it clearly?
Fluckiger. It's really close. It's hard. It's like Fluckiger.
Ah, so Fluckiger.
Fluckiger. That's
Fluckiger.
Right.
Okay, got it. Whoa. So I'm sorry I mispronounced it at the beginning.
It's all good. Listen, I was a keynote speaker at a 3-day conference once. And if you've looked at how my last name is spelled, Fluckiger, you'll know what it looked like when the host of the 3-day conference, at which I was the keynote, on all the programs accidentally left the L out of my last name. For 3 days, He apologized, and I got to make jokes. It was great.
Oh, yeah. Well, I guess that is one of the blessings of having an unusual last name, for sure. So, I mean, wow. A near-death experience. I think you're only the second person I have ever met or known personally who's had a near-death experience, and I know that's got to be one hell of an experience. I'd love to have the experience part. Not so sure about the near-death part, but I'm sure that you have some stories to tell today. And before we go any further, I want to tell people about this book of yours. So can you all see that? This is called Meeting God at the Door. And I'm afraid I can't read that backwards. It says Conversations, Choices, and Commitments of a Near-Death Experience by our host, Kellan Fluckiger. All right. So I hope you'll grab a copy of that, head off to Amazon and pick up a copy of that. It's a really great book. I've read it myself, and I was very, very touched by what I learned. I want to thank you for writing that, Kellan. And so, why don't you dive right in. Tell us a little bit about what happened, about some of the events that led up to this experience for you.
Well, first of all, it's not something you ever plan on.
Of
It's
course
not something you ever imagine will happen to you, although I had heard about, first time I heard about something like that, I was about 10 and on my grandfather's farm in Wyoming, and we heard about the town bad boy who was, kind of a drunk and this and that thing, and then he'd had what I had gathered was some kind of a near-death experience and came back a completely changed person. So that was my introduction to the concept as a youngster. And I'd heard about it over the years and also associated with a lot of personal development and so forth. My conception of God and religion was really negative. My mom was very fanatic, a lot of physical abuse and got to be good and everything else. Nobody was an alcoholic, but there was a lot of fanaticism. And so I was afraid of everything. And if I viewed anything about the afterlife, it was with a great amount of terror. I grew up and sort of pretended to cast all that off. But the truth is, we don't know very much. And even though I had been an avid student of meditation since I was in my late teens, that's probably the only thing that kept me alive during the decades of depression. I still didn't have any idea. And so I didn't know. I'd had some, what I would have considered divine intervention in my life that had helped me change my life from depression and addictions and those kinds of things, which were rampant for decades because I never got any help until my mid-50s, which is about 10 years ago. I'm 65. So I knew there was something, but it still scared me. And those divine interventions, if anybody's interested in that, it's in another book called Tightrope of Depression, My Journey from Darkness, Despair, and Death to Light, Love, and Life. But anyway, the things in that book happened in about 2007, so about 13 years ago. And I moved through years trying to be the best person I could. I completely changed my career, walked away from contracts, changed my life, overcame all my addictions, changed my universe, et cetera, and was going along what I thought was doing good and felt pretty good about it, but still this underlying fear of not knowing, like you've described. In June of 2018, Joy and I went on a cruise.
And who is
neither
Joy?
one of us.
Just let people know who Joy is.
Joy is my wife.
Oh, okay, right.
And how I met her after my numbers of failed relationships, and that whole piece of the divinity is also in Tightrope. So I won't tell that story now, but that was divine too. It was crazy, like insane how it all happened. You wouldn't believe it if I told you. Anyway, so.
Oh, I believe it.
Yeah, but, well, we don't have time or I'd tell you the story. But anyway, maybe I will later. It might come up. So we went on this cruise, and neither one of us had ever been on a cruise before, even though I had lots and lots of high profile jobs and made a lot of money and all that jazz, and secretly in the background dealing with depression and addictions and all that stuff. And I do this because that's the ups and downs of that process. Anyway, we went on a cruise. It was the North Baltic Sea. So we stopped at St. Petersburg, and I kind of knew where it was, but not really because my geography isn't great. But Joy was a seasoned European traveler, so she was excited. Anyway, toward the end of it, I got sick. And I don't ever go to the doctor. I've been extremely healthy all my life, and I'm just not a doctor guy. So we got home. We flew home from Amsterdam. Monday was the first day of real sickness. Tuesday was the day we flew home, and it was terrifying. The stewardess kept asking me if I was okay, and she could see I had a fever, and so it was pre-COVID, obviously. Otherwise, they would have thrown me out of the plane. But she gave me ice things and everything. So we got home. I went home, still didn't go to the doctor. Wednesday, Thursday went by. Finally, Friday, which is day 5, and that'll be significant in a minute. Friday, day 5 of this illness, I decided I better go to the walk-in clinic. We live in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. So they have walk-in clinics, and there was one just a little ways from the house. So I went there. They had a sign on the wall that says, if you have a cough or this and that, tell the nurse before you come in. And this is all pre-COVID stuff, obviously. But so I did. And she came outside and looked at me and said, you can't come in here. We can't do anything for you. Go to the emergency room. So that's what I looked like. I couldn't see myself, so I didn't know. We got to the ER. And usually, of course, you wait an hour or 2 or 3 or 4, depending on what's going on there. In 10 minutes, I was in a private room, In 10 more minutes, I had a doctor there. It took about 2 or 3 hours to find a bed. They admitted me, and then the doctor came in and said something you never want to hear. He said, first, you have pneumonia in both lungs. That's the good news. The bad
Wow.
news is something terrible else is going on. We don't know what's caused it. We don't know what's going on, and you're in bad shape. And he came back a little while later and said, we're going to have to put you in ICU. And then he looked at me and said, do we have permission to intubate you and do anything we need to do to preserve your life? What? Like, what did you just ask me? Just blew me away. And so, of course, I said yes. And then he left, and I went into meditation, and I could feel after a few minutes in meditation, my body and spirit separating. It was the weirdest feeling, but I knew I was dying. So I said, Joy had gone home by then because it was the middle of the night. So I sent her a text with 3 lines in it. ICU was the first line. The second line was isolation/intubation. And the third line was, I may be dying.
Oh my
She had
God.
gone to sleep and didn't see that. And about an hour later, at 2 a.m, she got a call from the hospital with the question you never want to get, like mine, only the nurse said to her, are you coming? And she said, what? Like, what are you talking about? And then she saw my text. And then, it went from there. So about an hour after that, I lapsed into a coma. Code blue, green, whatever it was in the hospital, I was gone. So they put me in emergency, and they put me in biological isolation with one of those negative pressure rooms where you have hazmat suits and the whole 9 yards, because they didn't know what was wrong with me. They intubated me and were trying to keep me alive because I was dying.
So you had one of those machines that was inside your lungs?
The whole thing. I was so full of tubes. Joy said nothing that well, here's was her description. Nothing that the nurse told me or that I had heard prepared me for what I saw. She said nothing prepared me for it. I walked in the room and I just melted down. She said I didn't have any idea what to do. And so she didn't get hysterical because she's not that kind of a person. In those situations, she gets real calm and clear. So she got to what's going on? What do I need to do? What's happening? And she pestered the crap out of the nurses. Every time my blood pressure went up or down or sideways, she's all over them and all kinds of stuff. And one of my legs got really hot once. And so she told the nurse, freaked out, got ice packs. It was a whole circus. So in the book, Meeting God at the Door, I wrote the experience from 2 perspectives. One was my perspective about what happened inside, and the other was the perspective of what was going on in the emergency room. But I got all that from Joy because, of course, I didn't know. So both those stories are in there. But anyway, so
I just want to take a breath here. I just want to take a breath. Whew. I mean, I know that you went through this, and I know that, in your mind, it's just an event that happened for you, but I want people to just kind of take a breath and feel into what this must have been like. Because I know I'm feeling some emotion right now. So I just want to take a breath. I want to thank you and honor you for sharing what you're sharing this morning. It's really touching me deeply. And I imagine others are being touched as well, even if they're just watching the recording. Wow. You know, I wish I could give you a big hug right now, Kellan.
Thank you. I would be honored to receive it.
Quite a journey. And you haven't even gotten to the.
I would say we just got started, man. This is the downhill part.
I know, man. I'm doing that because I need to take a breather here.
Sure. Please do. Thank you. I appreciate your sensitivity to that, because I lived through this and came out the other side and wrote the book and everything else. I probably do it too fast. So thank you.
Yeah. Wow. All right. So you're in the hospital.
So it turns out I went in on Friday, as I mentioned. They didn't find out what I actually had until Monday. And I'm going to put it in the context of COVID, since that's what's happening right now. What it turned out is that the bacteria that I had in both lungs was a necrotizing MRSA. You know,
that means it eats flesh, right?
Superbugs, yeah. A flesh-eating superbug. The mortality rate of COVID that we have globally is 2%, 2.5%, 3%, somewhere in that range, maybe less. Some people say it's less than 1%. But think 2.5 people out of 100 die when they get COVID. The doctor told me that the mortality rate of what I had in my lungs, this particular strain, and a superbug is one that's resistant to all antibiotics. So because they didn't know what I had, in all the IVs, they were filling me full with every high-level antibiotic known to man. I mean, I was just, whatever we got, we're putting it in there just to see, because I was dying.
That's right.
And so when they said, do we have permission to intubate you and do whatever we could, they were doing it. I mean, Joyce said it was like a scene from a movie. People were running all over the place in the ER, and they were all in hazmat suits and the whole 9 yards. I mean, as far as they'd concerned, I'd come back with Ebola and it was contagious. They didn't know what was going on. So there I was. They told me later that the 10-day mortality rate for what I had was 100%. So instead of 2.5%, it's 100% if you were not in hospital care. If you were in hospital care, it was only 60%, which is still 25 times more fatal than COVID. So just to give you a sense of what was going on, I was walking death for anybody around me. Okay, so but they didn't know that till Monday, and by then the experience I'm about to share with you was over. So here's what happened on my side. I've given you some description about what was running around outside, some frantic stuff going on. I came to sometime after my entry into the coma, not in the hospital room, but somewhere else. The room was gray. I was horizontal, which reflected what I was in the hospital room. I could see over there a doorway. And the doorway was white, but the light wasn't streaming through. So I could see it was white on the other side, but my side was gray. Okay, and I had a yearning to be at that doorway. I wanted to be there. So then I was at the doorway. And I was on the gray side, and I was leaning against the door jamb on my right shoulder. And there was a being on the other side, on the white side, leaning against the door jamb on their right shoulder. As I stood there talking, we started to talk. And I knew it came to me immediately what this doorway was. Like, there was no question where I was standing and what was going on. And the first of 3 conversations started with a single question. And the question was, do you want to come home? What? Speechless, I stood there trying to grasp the real gravity and situation. Like, I knew where I was. I knew who that was. I knew do I want to come home? Holy crap. So then my mind started going through, and we started talking about all the reasons to go, all the reasons to stay, what I had left unfinished, what I had committed to do after the previous divine interventions 10 years earlier had saved me from dying by addictions and so forth. And it was a long conversation. Just I thought about Joy and about her situation and about our life and what we were trying to do. And I have 10 children, and some of them are still estranged because of the addictions and the divorces and the disaster and battlefield that my life had been before. And I just felt like there was a lot unfinished. Now, when I told you that my expectation of meeting God before was one of fear, what was noticeable, remarkable, and incredible about this circumstance was most noticeable by its absence. There was no fear, there was no negativity, there was space. The question had been asked, and it was in the air, and it needed an answer. There was no hurry. There was no expectation one way or the other. It was just there. So we talked for a while, and I said, finally, no, I don't. I'm not done. The answer was, I'm not done. Okay. So then that was the end of that conversation. The next day, which would have been Sunday, I don't know how you know it's the next day. I don't know anything. You just do. The next day, I was back at the door, leaning on the same shoulder, talking to the same person. The question that had been asked the day before wasn't raised again. That was decided. So this one was, okay, cool. I'm not quoting. Okay, you're staying. What are you going to do? So we talked about coaching. We talked about divine gifts. We talked about the purpose of each of us in this life, why we're all here, what my role might be, what little piece I could add to that. And I came away from that extended conversation, that was the longest, with 4 things that were, I'll give you, bulletproof, clear as anything. So I said, I came away knowing that you listening to this, you, David, me, Kellan, all of us are intentional, divine, created beings. We are not accidents. We are not here by chance. We are here on purpose with a purpose. The second truth that became 100% clear was every single person who came here, regardless of their situation or circumstance, was given divine gifts of one kind or another. You may or may not know what those are. You may doubt that you have them. You may think that they are some esoteric, fairy, weird stuff that doesn't matter, but you have them. What you think about them is your story and mine. They were given to you as a gift by the divine creator. The third truth that I came away with is that every single one of us had a purpose or purposes and mission, as it were, that we were given, that we agreed to, and that we were excited about before we came. Right. And obviously it was connected to these gifts. So there are gifts, talents, whatever you want to call them, and a mission, a purpose that we have that might change over time. If you have kids, you're raising kids. And if you have a message, you have a message, it changes over time, but you have gifts and you have a purpose. And by this time in the conversation, I'm getting really excited. I remember vibrating with excitement. The way I felt at the time, I thought about it even at the time, was a little bit like that Jodie Foster movie, if you've seen it, where she goes through this weird whirling thing and is transported some interdimensional outer space, and she sees everything. Like you're just holding on for dear life. And somehow I was able to absorb and connect in that fashion. But I felt like this overwhelming intensity of knowledge and experience and beauty and excitement and connection. And the thing, again, that was noticeably absent was any negativity, any fear, any judgment, any of that I had been so afraid of, simply not part of the conversation.
Beautiful.
The fourth thing was something I had never really thought about in this way, but the fourth truth, besides you're divinely created, you have gifts, you have a purpose, is that all the help that you need to do that is available from both sides, divine side and from the earthly side. Now, as I say that, and felt it, then I thought, well, if we're all divinely created, not if, you don't say if when you're standing there, since we're all divinely created, and since we all have gifts, and since we all have a purpose, and since all the help we need is available from both sides, and I said this, I said, why do we settle for crumbs? Those are the words I use. Why do we settle for crumbs?
Very true, isn't it?
Yeah, because that's how we live that way. We all live so far below what's possible. And I don't know if in the economy of heaven, brevity is a virtue, but the answer was 4 words. Because you don't believe. Okay. What am I going to do about that? Glad you ask. And so then the next whole part of this conversation was a very specific formula process about changing beliefs, about how we understand what we believe and how we go to work with a very intentional process to change it. That is written in a second book, sequel to Meeting God at the Door, called The Book of Context. Because context is that boundary of belief that we have that keeps us from doing things. It makes us not try when we can. Okay. So then that was the end of that conversation. And I had the sense that was a long conversation. But I was excited. I was just buzzing is the word that felt. The third day, which would have been Monday, I came back. I was back at the door. And this time I came back just really excited about what I was going to do. And I'd been going over and over in my mind the principles of the Book of Context and the principles that I had, just going over them and over them and over them and over them in my mind. And I was just really excited. And I came back the third day, and there we were again. And this time it was just one question again. So I'm buzzing and I'm excited, jumping up and down, feeling that way, right? And the one question was, are you sure? And again, I was speechless. I'm like, what do you mean, am I sure? Am I an idiot? Am I biting off more than I can chew? Is there something I'm missing? Like, am I stupid? What do you mean, am I sure? That's what I felt, right? And so from every possible perspective, Am I biting off more than I can chew? Did I miss something? Do I know what I'm getting into? Are you kidding? All of those things I went through in that third conversation. And at the end, and I share something with you. One of the most important things of that third conversation in the "Are you biting off more than I can chew" angle, because I was looking at that question from every possible angle that my limited, puny brain could think of. I'm like, okay, is there something I'm missing? One of the most important things was the assurance that I received in a way that can only happen in those places of that fourth principle, which is all the help you need is available. Although it did come with what seems to be the principle of how that works. And that is, there's no coercion involved. You have to ask, you have to seek, you have to want, you have to go get it. Like seek and ye shall find, ask and it, all that jazz. Like there's not interference. It's available. So that came home like really hard. Okay, I can do this. This is not more than I can chew, but I have to. Okay, then I have to do it. I have to do it. Like it isn't going to do itself. Okay. And so that tempered with all this excitement, I finally said, okay, yes, I'm sure. Okay. So the conversation came to an end and nothing was said, but I knew that was the last conversation. We're done. And Monday night or Tuesday, I learned later, was when it was finally determined after 3 days of this frantic stuff that I wasn't going to die. Because during that whole 3 days, Joy told me later, again, I don't know this, she told me later, nothing changed. I was literally at the gate of death. And the doctor said, we don't know. We do not know. Whatever's going on is going on. We can't do anymore. It's where it is.
It doesn't really matter whether they knew or not, because you
knew. I knew. I didn't know what was going on outside, but that's
right.
Yeah. Found out later. She said Monday night they finally figured out what I had, and they started being able to do things that mattered. I was in a coma for 2 more weeks while I gradually recovered a little bit, until 2 weeks later I came out of a coma and a bunch of other stuff happened, but not related to this visit. In fact, antithetical to this, and I'll tell you that maybe later. But that was the end of the 3 visits and 3 conversations. And when I did come to 2 weeks later, in my mind, all I spent that 2 weeks doing was rehearsing what I had heard, what I had said, what I had felt, what I was going to do. I was excited. I was so excited. And when I finally came out of the coma, that's all I could talk about. Yeah. And I was sure that the nurses thought I was nuts. When they finally moved me off the floor to a regular ward and they took me out of the weird zone, put me in a regular thing up a few floors.
The weird zone?
Well, whatever it was, isolation and everything else. Here's the funny thing. When they took all the tubes out of me, you know how sometimes when people can't breathe, they give them a tracheotomy. They cut open here to connect with the trachea. Mm-hmm. They did that to me afterwards. So they took all the tubes out, then they cut a hole in there in case there was a problem. So the tracheotomy that they cut in my neck was after, just in case. So anyway, just funny, usually that's something they do to save your life. It's like, yeah, all right, you're going to live, but we got to cut this hole in here just in case. So I had a tube in my neck for a while too. But anyway, that's all I could do was slobber all over these nurses about stuff. And I thought, oh man, I'm sure they think I'm crazy. When they moved me up to the next floor, the doctor, the infectious disease specialist who had been in charge, happened to be one of the top guys in Canada. He came in and we said goodbye and joked, and he said, well, goodbye. And I said, I hope I never see you again. And he said, yeah, I'll bet. And so, blah, blah, blah. And then he turned around in all seriousness and he said, I need to know what you saw. So whatever it is that I said wasn't as crazy as I thought it was.
No.
And the last piece of this is 6 months later, after I'd gone home, we'll come back to here in a minute. 6 months later, when I went home, I had a recurrence of the MRSA in my upper spine. I woke up paralyzed from the waist down. We had to have emergency surgery, middle of the night stuff, whole nother story, but no coma, no experience. It was funny because after they did that, I went from the ER to the OR. I woke up paralyzed from the waist down, fell out of bed on my face on the floor, 911, hospital, all that jazz. That's a whole nother story. That's in the book Walking Without Fear, which is the one after Book of Context. But here was the funny thing. When they put a PICC line in me, which is one of these things they put under your right arm and it goes over and empties in your heart. So I had to carry a bag of antibiotics for 6 weeks with a pump that had to change twice a day. And this drip pump pumped the antibiotics right directly into the heart, because the antibiotics were so powerful that it would have collapsed all the veins if they'd put it anywhere else. So it was dripped directly into the heart, because that's the only place where there's enough liquid to not kill you. So anyway, the first time I went to the hospital to get the bags after we were let out a week, and this is 6 months later, I went in there and I said, okay, I'm Kellan Fluckiger here to get my allotment of bags. I had to go in every week because they wouldn't give me more than a week's worth, which was 14 because you had 2 a day. I said, I'm Kellan, and I got that far. And the ICU nurse who was in the outpatient pharmacy that hands out that kind of stuff, she spun around and said, oh, we know who you are.
Yeah, right.
And this is 6 months later, and I said, what? Oh, we know. So that wasn't even in the same building. So I tell you that to say how powerful this stuff, this truth, this opportunity for everyone that wants it, because there's nothing special about me. I'm just the messenger. I made a choice to stay because I have work to do, and you are the work, which is to elevate the belief and opportunity that you have so much potential, opportunity, and there's so much love surrounding all of us if we will just seek and open. So I've talked to Blue Streak for a half an hour. I'll be quiet now. That's
well, I can tell that you're still very excited about it, and yeah, that's quite an experience that you went through. And I want to thank you again for sharing. I feel real blessed just to be able to share the space with you. I find it interesting that a lot of what you say, a lot of what you heard in your 3 conversations is stuff that many teachers have been teaching, but many people have been hard of hearing. And I think that you have the blessing of experiencing the information direct, firsthand, and not as just a faith expression. It was something that you just knew it was true in your heart and in your soul the moment that it happened. And I think if we all take a moment and pause and just think about our lives, I think we've all had moments like that, if not necessarily through a near-death experience. We've certainly had moments like that. Maybe just when sitting on the top of a mountain all by yourself, you just know that there's some truth there that you haven't been paying attention to, or maybe you're present for the birth of a child. That is another one of these experiences that reminds you of the spiritual nature of who we are. So it's a beautiful, beautiful message that you have. And I'm so grateful that you were able to share it here on this show today, and I know that you're going to get a lot more exposure on this because it's a brilliant, touching, beautiful, life affirming story. So, thank
So
you.
some people ask me, I'm a coach. So my business is I'm a coach. I have clients all over the world. I help people, grow businesses, grow their lives and everything else, blah, blah, blah. And I say blah, 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 not because it's unimportant. It's not. It's very important. You're a coach. You do much the same thing. So the thing that people ask me about what I do, what do you do to be so energized? What do you do to this and that? I only have one reason I'm here. So from the minute I wake up every single day, including today, from the minute I open my eyes till the minute I go to bed, I'm only about one thing. Everything I put on social media, every book I write, I have 13 now and I have 5 more in the works. Every YouTube video that I make, every coaching client that I have, it is about that one thing. Can I help? Can I serve one person a little bit more so that they're willing to accept and live to those things you just talked about? Those moments of truth they've had in their lives where they know in their soul things they can't explain or don't want to or don't dare or are afraid to believe or whatever it is, to accept that and to live into that. Because business people come and they'll say, I need to make more money and I need to do this. And I go, okay, good, let's make more money. And without question, by the time we've talked 3 or 4 times, every single time, it's about how you live. It's about who you're being. It's about how you show up. If you want more money, then you got to show up as the guy that makes more money by bringing more value and being more true. That's all it's about. And so, I'm pretty WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. And I don't put on an act ever. So if you met me in real life, in person, pretty much the same thing.
Well, I have to say something about that because I think the first time I met you was probably in 2011 or maybe 2012, somewhere in that time frame, in relation to the Messenger network. And we were doing something with Robert Evans and a bunch of other people, and I have to admit, you strike me as a very different person today than I remember in 2011 or 2012.
Well, I hope so.
Yeah, so something changed. And, I think when you talk about putting on an act or not putting on an act, I think that's your words, your phrase. My phrase is letting the ego mind do the work rather than letting the soul do the work. And if we let our ego minds run the show, then we're always putting on an act. If we let our soul run the show, then we are pure, authentic, true to ourselves. And those people who do that are the ones who find themselves attracting all kinds of amazing people in their lives. And you've talked about so many things here, but your 4 items that came up in your conversation, I think it boils down to something that I call believe and achieve. And I think that's something that you teach as well. So let's talk a little bit about that, the whole idea of believing. How can we believe something that maybe up till now seems like a foreign concept?
So I define the word context to be an acronym called Be Deep, BDEEP. Your Be Deep, and that is your beliefs, your definitions, your experiences, your expectations, and your perceptions. So you have a Be Deep, so do I. It comes from everything that's happened around us, before us, all this stuff. And the thing is, we live bounded, like in prison, from that Be Deep, what we believe, beliefs, definitions, experiences, expectations, and perceptions. And the first time I spoke at an event about this situation, there was a question from the audience, two questions, or one question. I gave two answers. The question was, so what's the biggest thing that's different for you now that this has happened? And I hadn't prepared for any questions, and so I didn't think about it. And I opened my mouth, and what came out is, I no longer experience fear. And the second thing that came out is, when I meet people, I can see them in their context straitjacket. And what I can see is that it is transparent and flexible. They just don't know it.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Transparent and flexible. I like that. You know, it's interesting that you use the word context. I've been reading a lot of David R. Hawkins' books recently. I don't know if you've read any of his stuff, but
I've got a couple on the shelf over there.
Yeah, he talks about a lot about the levels of consciousness and stuff. And he also makes mention of this notion of content versus context. Every element of content has to exist within some context. And the content may not change from one context to another, but our interpretation of the content can change depending on the context. And so you're absolutely right. We have to elevate our consciousness to the point where we see the context and we experience the context. Therefore, once we're in the context, we can eliminate judgment and everything else, because now we understand the content more clearly. It's an amazing awareness that I hadn't thought about before, but I so much of his stuff just kind of hits me.
So the book of context, that's a funny story. I have a client who's a retired physician in Baltimore. And I asked him to write the foreword for the book of context. And he read it and he wrote some really nice things. But he called me one day and he said, I love the book. I love stuff, blah, 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 blah. But I don't know about the name. He said, if you'd written the book of joy or the book of love or something, someone would understand it. But the book of context? And I waited till he was all done explaining why it might need a different name. And then I laughed and I said, Mort, the name is not negotiable. Yeah. Because it came as part of the whole thing. And the whole book of context was the guts of that second conversation and the answer to the question, what do I do about the don't believe part? So you listening to this right now and me, we all have beliefs. BD, beliefs, definitions, experiences, expectations, and perceptions. And when you say, how do I change those things? If I believe you, Kellan, or other teacher that I've read or heard, that they're just my beliefs, and I could do something else, but they're so deep, they're so much. What I did in the book of context is just outline a step-by-step process to change them that doesn't involve saying, okay, I believe something else right now, because that method doesn't work, because we believe what we believe in. So if I say, well, I need to believe something else, and someone tells me, well, believe that instead. Okay, I'll believe that instead, except we don't.
Yeah, it's not quite that simple. Yeah.
No, and so it doesn't start there. It starts with a different way of going about changing those beliefs. Anyway, that's funny. In the book of context, the name came in the Revelation. And so when Mort said, no, you can't name it that, I laughed and I waited till he was done and said, I'm sorry, the name is not negotiable. So he laughed. Oh, okay, I get it.
Okay. Right. Well, but context is important, as we've said. And, like I said, the David R. Hawkins books are great materials for learning more about context. They're also fairly deep books and maybe some difficult for some people to comprehend. I think you really have to go into it with a mindset and a heart set of openness and saying, I want to learn something new. And if you can go that way, then it kind of comes more easily. It's easier to comprehend. I want to come back to another point that you mentioned about, well, I don't know if you actually mentioned this word, but we talked about it somewhere, about the idea of limitless joy. The idea of finding a way of knowing the truth of who we are and then connecting into that. And that's really the source of limitless joy. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, so I call everybody, we all have our own little names and nomenclatures, and I call that your ultimate life. So if a person says your ultimate life, I ask people all the time, so what do you really want? Like, what would be the ultimate thing? Everybody usually, not always, but everybody usually starts with the superficial, well, I had all the money I wanted, or all the time I wanted, or all this and all that. And when you get past all that crap and you ask, what do you want that for? What will that do for you? And you get down to the level of something that means something. And I don't mean money's not fun. A little side note here. Most of the time people who say that, others say, well, you're saying that because you don't have any. Well, I'm one of those guys that made millions and it didn't make you happy. I spent it on dumb things and it made me more miserable. So if you think that money's the answer, it ain't. But when you get down to the bottom and you think about ultimate life, I say, well, my ultimate life is a life of purpose, prosperity, and joy.
Yeah.
That I create by serving others with my divine gifts.
Beautiful.
So there it is. Life of purpose, prosperity, and joy created by serving others with your divine gifts. I can't imagine any life better than that.
That's a beautiful mission statement, I think. And that's how I interpret it. Now, I phrase things a little differently than you do, and that's fine. I mean, we have two different ways of doing things, but we ultimately get to the same objective. But I love what you said, because that really is a mission statement. It's a purpose statement. It's a purpose for life. And when I fulfill my purpose from my heart and my soul, then joy just automatically shows up because I'm connected to the truth of who I am. It's a beautiful thing.
I love that truth of who I am. That's something that people ask all the time, and they say often, and I know you experience this as a coach, people talk about clarity. I'm not clear. I don't really want to, I don't know. I got to know, I got to have this clarity. And so I got so tired of hearing that. I created a little phrase that says, clarity is overrated. It is not found, it is created. Because I got tired of the feeling that somebody's going to get a shovel and go dig for clarity in the yard. You know what I mean? You don't find it. You create it by acting.
Yeah,
joy
right.
Joy is a choice.
Exactly. It's the same thing with happiness, for God's sake. I mean, if in the American Declaration of Independence, we talk about the pursuit of happiness, the right to the pursuit of happiness. It's an unalienable right. Why on earth do we have to pursue it? Because happiness is a part of who we are. It's our natural state. It is when we know the truth of who we are, we eliminate this ego mind and settle it down and tame it and reconnect to our heart and our soul. Happiness is right there. So you don't have to go out and get anything. No more money, no more, fancy cars or houses. Sure, those are nice to have, but they aren't going to make you happy. Even if for the brief moment that you are obtaining it, you might have a little smile on your face and you might get excited about running up and down the stairs of this fancy new house. That is going to go away like that. The real happiness is in here.
Well, that's true. And that's joy. Joy is a choice. It's funny that I found that on a shopping bag. Joy and I were in Krakow, Poland last November, just right before COVID. And I was there for an event I was participating in. And we went shopping on one of the main streets in Krakow, which is the town, old town, the place of kings. There's an old castle that's from the 1000s or something up on the hill. Anyway, we went shopping and it was this Italian leather store. And I'm not much for fancy design or anything, but I do like bags, briefcase kind of things. And so I went in there and Joy found something and I found this bag that was this really pretty thing. So I decided to, okay, I'll buy it. And so I bought it. And the bag wasn't the issue. It's not even an issue. The bag wasn't the funny part, although I liked the bag. When we got outside, we had it was a whole experience. They walk around the counter and they give you this thing and all the ooh la la. So I walk outside holding this bag and Joy and I are talking about it, and I look at the bag and on the outside of the bag, it says, joy is a choice. And I loved that. And I thought, what a motto for the store. You know, joy is a choice. Now, never mind that my wife's name is Joy. That's got all kinds of other.
Well, it's got multiple meanings for you, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's got all kinds of meanings for me. But at the end of the day, joy is a choice. I don't need to be happy then. I can be happy now, which is what you said. 100% agreement. Like, who can take that from me?
Exactly. Nobody can take it away from you. Nobody can take the truth of who you are away from you. They can try and impose certain belief systems on you. They can try and get you conditioned into thinking a certain way and to trying to fit into somebody else's idea of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. But let me tell you, that's not the pathway to joy. That's the pathway to misery. And we've all experienced it. We all know what that's like. But really, the truth is we have to come back to who we really are. And not be afraid to say, I am who I am, and I don't need you to tell me anything.
You know, David, I have a question that's really interesting, and I want you, me, all of us to think about. When we try to do self-improvement and try to do things, there's this, you know, we make these declarations and everything, and there's always this feeling that there's some kind of doubt and fear underneath, and I call it the underneath. And so I started wondering one day, why is there an underneath, and is there a way to get underneath the underneath?
Yeah,
like, can I get to the root? Can I get to the core of things? And the answer is yes, and it has to do with just what you said, which I love, which is I declare who I am. I need no one's permission. I need no one's agreement. I need nothing. I decide. And if I plant that as the root, then there can be doubts and everything else, but they're on top now. Yeah. Because the underneath is what I said. And someone says, well, why do you say that? Why are you that? Because I said so.
Right. Absolutely. I agree 100%. And the other part of it, of course, is, and I'm sure you experienced this yourself with your own, you know, with this experience by a God at the door. The idea that we really are all one. This idea of separation is 100% illusion based solely on the limitations imposed by our ego mind. The moment we settle that down and get down to the truth of who we are, we recognize we are all the same thing. We are all part of the same consciousness. We're all sharing this experience together. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing when you can get there and get there without ego. Because then I have no desire whatsoever to try and tell you anything about what you are or what are not. It's interesting how that happens.
Well, that goes to I agree with you. That goes to the whole thing of if I hurt you, I hurt me. I mean, we're part of that. And
yeah.
The extent we can learn to love and serve each other from that place, and that means in every interaction, I need nothing.
Right.
And if you always need nothing, that's Michael Singer talked about that. If you enter every interaction needing nothing, then you end up conducting every action from a point of view of service because you don't need anything.
Exactly. That's a beautiful place to be. Well, Kellan, it's been an absolutely fabulous conversation. I want to remind people about your book called Meeting God at the Door, Conversations, Choices, and Commitments of a Near-Death Experience. Well worth reading. You'll get a lot more detail than what we talked about here on the show today. Head over to Amazon and pick up a copy of that and help out because, you know, buying a book like this raises consciousness, believe it or not. So, Kellan, I just want to thank you so much for being here. Before I wrap up, is there anything else you would like to say to close out this session?
I want to do two things. One, I want to thank you for hosting these. I know you've been doing this Life Mastery TV for a long time, and I know that it's dear to your heart and that it's important work. So I want to thank you for both doing work and for inviting me to be part of it. The second thing that I want to, and the last thing I want to leave anyone with, is the last thing that I would want you to go away from this experience with is the feeling of, gee, that's interesting, huh? And then go back to whatever you were doing. What I want for you is to ask yourself, since that happened over there, what does that mean for me? What can I do, be, say, to change my be deep, to get out of my straitjacket? Because if that happens with even one person, then this conversation we had will be worthwhile.
Yeah, beautiful. And if it happens to one person, then it can happen to two people. And if it can happen to two people, it can happen to four people. You get where I'm going with this.
Everybody.
Yeah. And it doesn't take long to get to everybody.
No, it doesn't.
You remember the advertisement? You tell a friend and they tell two friends and they tell two friends. Before you know it, the whole world has heard the message. Let's make sure to tell two people. Tell two people about this. That's all. And let them tell two other people, each of them. It's amazing, powerful stuff, and that's what we're here to do with Life Mastery TV and the work that Kellan does. We're here to raise consciousness and elevate the consciousness of the planet, because Lord knows we need more love on this planet.
We do.
So I want to thank you all for watching today's program. I want to remind you that you can catch recordings of this and every other episode on my website at lifemasterytv.com. That's life-mastery-tv.com. I truly hope you enjoyed this program. It's been a very special one for me. I think it's the first time I really got that emotional, and I want to thank you, Kellan, for making that happen. But in a few hours, my friends, you're going to receive an email with a link to a feedback page. And my request is that you go and spend a little time, write a comment or two, and hopefully give us a 4 or 5 star review if you can, because that helps us to spread the word. And finally, please remember to practice the Life Mastery mantra every single day. It goes like this. I gratefully forgive the imperfect being I have been in the past. I gratefully accept the magnificent being I am right now. I gratefully welcome the evolved being I am becoming in each new moment. So until we meet again, I am David McLeod, your Life Mastery Coach, wishing you love, light, and blessings on your continuing journey. Thanks again. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye now.